They moved my place card while I was standing 3 feet away. 1 minute, my name was beside the family table at my son's wedding. The next, a coordinator was carrying it behind a wall of blue hydrangeas, telling me the head table was simply too small. My son Daniel saw me there and said hello without touching me. Then he looked past me toward the photographer. That was when I noticed the ivory envelope resting near the place setting I had been promised. My late husband Martin's handwriting was on the front, written in the blue fountain pen ink I knew at once. The envelope had been waiting at the family table, while I was being placed behind the family. I took it before Ruth could reach it. I did not know whether it contained an explanation, an apology, or something that would make the wedding's quiet insult impossible to dismiss. But whoever left it there expected me to understand why my son had moved me away. The coordinator didn't meet my eyes when he led me to a round table by the garden doors. He'd said, "Of course. So sorry. Last-minute adjustment." So many times he sounded like a recording. The band warmed up somewhere I couldn't see. A niece in boucle asked if I needed anything and drifted back toward the lights. At the new place there was a glass of water sweating onto a gray napkin and a card with a tidy gold border. It had said table 2. Now it said 14. What I felt then wasn't grand enough to be called public humiliation. More like having a key taken from your pocket by a practiced hand. My name, my seat, my place moved 2 lengths away, and no one even had to raise their voice. Daniel walked past me toward the room where the photographer was doing staged possibilities, the ones where you pretend to laugh over nothing because someday you'll want to remember that you once laughed this easily. He said, "Hey, Mom," and kept moving so that nothing had to stick to him. If you had seen his face, you would have called him a good son in a hurry. I call him that myself often. I watched the path the servers took between me and the front. They slid past a narrow opening in the flowers like people who know how to go through life without touching anything important. Ruth adjusted her bracelet and conferred with the coordinator. My card stayed at my far table. The envelope stayed at the near one, as if my husband's hand refused to be moved by anyone's polite adjustment. I walked up there with my bag under my arm as if I were looking for my shawl. The envelope was heavier than it looked. On the front, under my name in Martin's blue, he had written "Only if you need." The words sat there like a hand he left on the table for me to find or ignore. I slid it into my bag before Ruth could see my fingers on it. She was speaking to someone in a suit with a headset, leaned into her certainty. She has a way of making people feel like they are failing the standards of civilization if they don't do what she asks, then forgiving them in the same sentence so you almost thank her for the injury. After Martin died, it found a new stage. I waited until there was a gap, until no one was announcing anything, and opened the flap. A photograph slid into my palm first. It was Martin in front of our shop with the glass door open and one hand braced against the jamb. He wore the navy sweater with mended elbows. Beside him stood Nora, younger than the last time I had set eyes on her, hair pulled back, a look in her face that was both composed and intent. In the reflection across the glass you could see people gathered like a small crowd, and an orange sign that said "One day only." Above the door someone had taped a sheet that read "We keep our people." On the back, in pencil, someone had written "Our sale day." Under it, in Martin's blue, just one word, "After." I had not expected Nora's face. She was Claire's mother before Claire was my daughter-in-law, my neighbor before we were family by marriage. I could have read the letter under the tablecloth. I didn't. There are kinds of truth that don't belong to rooms full of other people's good dresses. I asked the coordinator for a small room. No mirrors, no audience. He found me the bridal dressing room, where hairspray hung in the air with cake sugar and peonies and a garment bag lay unzipped on a chair. I shut the door and took the letter out. It was Martin's voice on the page, the careful way he wrote when he needed to be clear. He had dated it with the month and the year and addressed me by my full name as if it might cross a border. He wrote that Ruth had come to him with a man who promised a clean exit, speaking in prices more than in people. The offer had sounded generous if you forgot who we were. Ruth had called it sensible, a relief. Martin had said no. He wrote that he had gone to Nora. Neighbors came with cash and kindness. A schoolteacher bought a winter coat for her mother. A boy who used to sneak pieces of tailor's chalk into his pocket grew into a man and paid full price for the first suit he bought with his own name on a pay stub. They hung a sign that said one day only and meant it with a kind of stubbornness you don't get from money. The building manager stood at the door and nodded like a judge who finally had his evidence. He wrote that he had left this envelope with Nora with a simple instruction: only if she needs it. He didn't want to scare me with the offer Ruth had made. He didn't want me to feel like every day we kept the shop was a dare. He wrote that sometimes a man brings home a solution without showing his wife the hunger that made him look for it, and that he trusted me to know what to do if the day came when I needed to open what he could not carry into our kitchen that afternoon. I sat there with the photograph and the letter and felt a second wave of realization. Until that moment, I had been angry about a chair. I had been angry about the kind of slight that can be explained away as logistics by anyone who needs not to see it. After I read Martin's blue paragraphs, I understood that the chair was not the point. The chair was the last in a line. The chair was what you get when someone has been telling your child a story about you, an edited version that cuts out the parts where you were brave and keeps the pieces that look like you were small. The chair was the end of a road my sister had been paving for years. Daniel had been driving on it because it was smooth. That was my midpoint. That was when I understood the day had changed shape. It was no longer a story about a wedding seating chart. It was a story about the way my son had used an easier telling of his childhood to justify the distance he preferred, a distance he had announced as adulthood. That letter took my anger and gave it a spine. There was a knock. The door opened before I could answer, the way it always has with Ruth. She said my name as if it were a synonym for obstinate. "You've been gone long enough," she said. "People are waiting." "I'm reading something," I said. Her eyes moved to the envelope and then to the photograph in my lap. "What is that?" Her voice carried back to the hallway because she always fills a door with herself. Claire slid in behind her, shut the door, and stood in that way she has that makes a room smaller for the right reasons. She put a hand on my shoulder without asking, as if to say, "I am in this with you now." She read the letter once and then again, slower. She turned the photograph over and looked at the pencil on the back. "My mom's hand," she said quietly. She reached into her clutch and took out a laminated recipe card she had kept there all day. Months ago, when we worked on her hem, she told me she planned to tuck one of Nora's cards somewhere on her person. It said apple cake in a neat loop across the top with Nora's tiny tail on the P. The G in sugar had the same gentle hook I saw on the back of the photograph. Claire laid them side by side and said it again like proof to herself as much as to us. "My mom's handwriting." That was Claire's independent verification. Graphite and ink and laminated cardstock that would be enough even for someone who didn't believe me. Ruth's mouth tried to decide between outrage and offense and ended up looking like both. "You're bringing up old messes at his wedding?" she asked. "Elaine, have you learned nothing? This is not the time to insist on your version of things. Daniel needed a cleaner life than the one you gave him. I have only ever tried to make that happen." "Clean is a word you use when the people you love have dirt under their nails from working," I said. "Martin said no to your man and went to Nora. They saved the day without selling the story of who we were to a stranger." Daniel stepped in, touching the door with his fingertips like he was asking permission from the room. He looked at me first. For a second I saw all the ages he had been. He glanced at the letter. He sat on the dressing stool like his knees wouldn't hold. "I believed you," he said to Ruth without taking his eyes off the letter. "I believed you because it let me not look at what I didn't want to look at." Ruth made a sound that could have been a laugh if it had any charity in it. "I told you the truth," she said. "Your mother never knew when to quit. She clung to the shop like it was a child and you were less important than the next hem. I was trying to save you from the smallness of her choices." Claire's voice was clean when she answered. "You told me that too," she said. "You told me Elaine made everything into work. You didn't tell me my mother was there that day, shoulder to shoulder, helping Martin hold the line. You left out the part where the neighborhood came and it mattered. You left out the part where a simpler life was offered and turned down because it didn't fit what they wanted to be. That changes how a person understands things." Daniel rubbed his face the way he always does when he is trying to take an inside picture and hang it straight. "I'm sorry," he said to me. "It was not a performative apology. I have been using the version Aunt Ruth told as if it were fact because it was easier for me. I didn't have to come by as often. I didn't have to explain. I didn't have to feel bad when I skipped a thing because the story said you were the kind of person who would rather be at the shop anyway." "It wasn't just Ruth," I said. "I gave you reasons to think that sometimes. I did the work to stay upright. I let the work do the talking when you needed me to do it. I missed your recital. I told myself there would be other nights. I didn't go back and tell you why it had hurt me to miss it. That was my mistake. But I will not let that truth be used as a stick to beat the rest of my life into a shape it doesn't belong to." He nodded. It was a small movement, but it was his whole face learning a new muscle. "Everyone is waiting," Ruth said, louder now as if volume could make her right. "Daniel, your grandparents want a photograph before the cake. We don't have time for this." "We do," Claire said. "We're taking 5 minutes. We can take 5 minutes for the truth. Then we can go feed cake to people with frosting plastered smiles." Ruth pressed her lips together and stood in the doorway like a sentry. I have seen that posture in her since we were children. Arms crossed, chin lifted. The suggestion that she knows what is best for all the lives in her address book. She cannot stand a conversation she can't win with the first sentence. I didn't need her to stand here anyway. I folded the letter along the old crease, slid it back into the envelope. My hand shook, but not because I was scared. Sometimes your body marks a day so you won't ever pretend it didn't happen. I looked up at Daniel. "I'm not going to stand by the cake and pretend we're fine," I said. "I'm not going to take a picture that will be used to argue later that everything was all right because we were all in one frame. I'm not angry in the way you might think I am. I'm tired of the part I've been cast in. I'm going to go home before the last dance. Tomorrow is different. Tomorrow we can begin to repair if you show up. I will not take up the project of forgiving you in a hurry so you can file me under resolved and go back to your regular hours." His face broke and mended and broke again. "I'll come tomorrow," he said. Claire looked at me and nodded like a woman who had just opened a new room inside herself and decided to use it for good. "Keep the photo and the letter somewhere you won't have to defend them," Claire added. She touched the recipe card and then tucked it back into her clutch like a talisman. I can tell my mother was proud to help that day. She would be happy to be of use again now. I could have stayed. I could have gone back to table 14 and lifted a glass and smiled like a person who had been given a seat where she belonged. I could have waited through toasts and cake and the last dance and hugged people in their satin and broad ties. But I am past the age where my dignity is improved by being watched. Leaving was not a speech. It was a boundary. The air outside felt like a room that had been aired out. The parking lot glittered with glass someone hadn't swept as carefully as they should have. I sat in the back of a car and held the envelope to my rib cage like a book. The driver asked if I'd had a good time. I told him it had been important. When I let myself into the shop, the chime in the door gave its small bell as if it were any other evening. The irons were cold. The air still smelled faintly like work, woolen steam and a line of starch. I made tea in the kettle that always protested before it gave in. I brought the mug to the work table where I keep the pieces of my life that don't go on the shelves. There is a shallow drawer there, right by the window, where I keep a dented thimble, a calendar page with a square around an appointment I didn't make again, a photograph of Martin on a January morning, and the grocery list where he once wrote sardines in a flourish so large it looked like a joke about royalty. His blue fountain pen has lived in that drawer as long as the shop has been ours. The cap clicks in a way I can find without looking. I put the envelope in the drawer beside Martin's pen. The ivory looked softer against the wood, like it had been meant to live there all along. I took the photograph and slid it under the clip that holds the January picture so that if you open it tomorrow you will see the man I married in his sweater, and then the way he stood in front of the shop with Nora beside him. After our sale day, you might ask why I didn't march back into the reception and show the letter to every face that had ever heard a version of my life that made me into someone easier to ignore. I could have done it. I could have read the blue lines aloud and held up the photograph like a victory banner. I didn't because sometimes truth grows smaller when you force it to perform. I didn't because I would not give Ruth another chance to call me dramatic, and then use my resistance as a reason to keep Daniel folded into her plan. I didn't because Claire had asked me for mercy for the night, and because my son had said he would come tomorrow. I also know Daniel is a man who counts himself a problem solver. He will try tomorrow to fix all of it in under an hour and go home feeling accomplished. That is not how this will work. Repair is not a sprint between speeches. It's a long pull with hands that cramp. He will have to show up again even when there are no witnesses. I thought of the way Daniel used to stop by after Martin died, sweeping without being asked, leaving a note under the till, telling me one small thing about his day. The details were how I knew what mattered to him. He changed over time. He asked for different parts of me. Sometimes I held to the rope I knew would keep us upright because the ground was unpredictable, and because every time I let go, the shop started to slide. Ruth offered him a life where his mother would stop being a tug on his sleeve. Because he was tired, he accepted it. He wasn't wrong to want rest. He was wrong to believe the price of it had to be me. At home, I placed the photograph beneath the clip that held Martin's January picture. The two images made a small bridge between the man I married and the man who had stood beside Nora when the shop needed neighbors more than promises. I remembered Daniel sweeping after Martin died, leaving a note under the till, telling me one small thing about his day. I also remembered the recital I missed because a customer's dress had split at the seam, and I believed being needed was the same as being present. That was my part. I had kept the shop upright, but I had sometimes asked Daniel to understand the cost before I had asked what the cost felt like to him. The truth did not make Ruth right. It made my apology to my son more honest. My phone buzzed on the table. A text from Claire. I love you. I put the phone face down and let the words sit. Then another from Daniel. I'll be there at 11. I counted how much sleep I could get if I could make my mind stop counting. The house was quiet, but quiet no longer meant empty. It meant I could hear my own judgment clearly. I have no idea what Daniel will say tomorrow beyond the words he already gave me. He will try to clean it up faster than it can be cleaned. He will expect I will help him. I won't help him skip steps. I will sit across from him at the table, and let him be a man who tells the truth without needing me to tell him he is forgiven before he has done the work that would make forgiveness make sense. I will not enlist Ruth. I will not replay the letter out loud like a judge at a bench. I will say what I need and then be quiet long enough for him to find his name without someone else choosing it for him. The envelope lay by the pen. Calm in the way a thing is when it has done exactly what it was meant to do and can rest. My son seated me away. Then I saw the envelope. I am not naive enough to think titles fix lives, but if I am going to tell this story to anyone, I will tell it from the place where the air changed. A seat was moved. A blue script waited where I should have been. I did what I needed to do next. If you were Elaine, would you leave before the last dance, or stay and speak with your son that night? If this story kept you company, I'd be grateful if you subscribe so we can meet here again.